Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, it's true that music can get you through some practically impossible times, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more enlightened in a conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because you're listening. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. Give us that old like, subscribe, and the 5-star rating. It is all good. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram at, you guessed it, In the Seats, for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large, because if we love to write about it and watch it and talk about it, we love it when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please pay us a visit. On this episode, we got a real special one. It's a film that's playing as a part of the Toronto Jewish Film Festival here in town, this coming June 15th. It is a beautiful piece of cinema, which is called The Rhapsody, and it's having its world premiere as part of the festival. It's the story of composer and Holocaust survivor Leo Spellman, who always dreamed of telling the world what happened in his time trying to stay alive. And at the age of 98, he starts to begin his journey. His musical masterpiece, which had been lost for more than 50 years, and his secret wartime diary are revealed for the first time in this film, and they're the framework for this tale of survival, which just has to be seen to be believed. It's purely remarkable. And I mean, this man was fueled by fear, heroism, and just, good old-fashioned guts. And Spielman's story is one that it's really compelling. It's so fascinating to see, and it's brought to life through not only him, but family, and also moments of animation and some great pieces of music as well. And it's an amazing thing to see, and it's one of those things where it's special because, it all ends up sort of in a small town in Poland where he narrowly escaped death, and his story was such a remarkable one. And even on the music side of things, it's fascinating to see just how people got involved and people helped him to make the recording of this fantastic piece. Because when Paul Hoffert, from who some of you fans may know from Lighthouse, the Canadian classic rock band Lighthouse, actually worked with Leo on this and helped to produce the film. And it's one of those things where it's just amazing. And we had the unique pleasure of talking with David Hoffert, who is Paul's son, just about the production of the production of the film, and just sort of arcing the story together, and just really all the elements that came together in this really fantastic piece of cinema, which is playing here in Toronto at the Hot Docs Cinema on June 15th as a part of the Toronto Jewish Film Festival. And if you're interested, we'll put a link in the description that you just clicked on, to find out more and to possibly get tickets and anything else in between. But first, enjoy our talk with David Hoffert as we really dive into the Rhapsody, which I really enjoyed, and I hope you do too.
No, I guess my first question is, because obviously I really enjoyed the film. Walk me through, I guess, discovering the story and deciding to make a film on it. Like, walk me through sort of the early days.
Well, this is one of those documentaries that happens every now and then, where it's been over 10 years in the making.
For sure.
So this started back in 2011. And it started originally with my father, Paul Hoffert. Paul is maybe best known for being the co-founder and keyboardist of the rock band Lighthouse,
For sure, yeah.
and many, many other things along the way. And he one day just randomly got a phone call from a 98-year-old gentleman named Leo Spellman. And Leo said, "Are you Paul Hoffert?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I understand you're my man." And it turns out that Leo had gotten my father's name from someone else in the industry, and he was looking to make a recording of this piece of music he wrote called Rhapsody, 1939 to 1945, that he had written shortly after World War II to musically tell his story of his incredible story of surviving the Holocaust, which included 18 months in hiding. And I can get into more detail of that as we go on, but so at first, though, it really came down to that this piece of music was written in 1947. He moved to Toronto shortly after that. It had been written in a displaced persons camp in Germany at that time, where he'd been, after he got out of Poland. And it sat in the bottom of the trunk, in his garage for 50 years. Until it was discovered in the year 2000 by a musicologist at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. That was Brett Werb. And at that point, around the year 2000, it actually got performed a few times with a smaller group of musicians, maybe like 8 or 9 musicians. And, it was a success. It was a shorter version. It was probably about 12 to 15 minutes, somewhere in that range. And but there was no good recording of those actual concerts. And so his family had kind of pestered him off and on for several years and said, hey, you're 98 years old right now. It's time to make a recording for posterity, and we can give it to our family and friends, as we call it, a vanity recording. And so he had contacted Paul, and he had asked if Paul would help him to help expand the Rhapsody to be a little bit longer, with some, including some music that had been around for close to 100 years. From his family, as part of a musical dynasty, and then also to orchestrate it for a larger orchestra, and then to record a CD. So Leo would go over to my parents' house maybe a couple times a week for over a couple months to actually work on this, and they worked on a computer. Program, which a music program, which Leo had basically pretty much never worked on a computer before. And so that was a new process for him. And then along the way, Leo would start to tell him some absolutely, kind of astonishing stories about these years that he was in hiding, which included times that he was chased by a guard and they had a gunfight, and he dug a hole to save his sister's life. I could get into more detail about that later, but and then when I started to hear these stories, I just thought this is unbelievable. I myself am a documentarian, and my mother as well. We had previously collaborated on a documentary that I had directed for the National Film Board called OCD, The War Inside. And that was, I think it was a fairly successful film. We won, quite a few awards. We played in festivals all around the world. And my mother is one of the producers on that film. And both of us just thought, we have to start filming this story, especially because he's 98. And we didn't have time to try to get grants or anything like that because, at that age, you better just start. So,
well, that dovetails into my next question, though. Like, was Leo a hard sell? Because, I mean, obviously he's not afraid to tell these stories, but he definitely struck me as somebody who needed to sort of warm up to somebody before he would tell these stories.
he was afraid to tell the stories. There were a few stories that he told, like 2 or 3 that he sort of told with some regularity to his family. But the vast majority of stories he had never told anybody, not to his children, not to anybody. And so his grandchildren had made an effort a few years earlier to try to get Leo to tell his stories, and they had a hard time with it.
Well, yeah, we see that in the film. Yeah.
Yes, you see that in the film. Exactly. He could be a little bit crusty and curmudgeonly at times, and he just kind of gave them a bit of a hard time. It was almost comical, and then they abandoned the project. Part of the reason is, as I say, a little crusty and curmudgeonly, as a 98-year-old person sometimes can be. But the other thing is that the stories themselves were quite painful to remember. And in fact, he probably had spent, 50 years trying to forget those stories. They weren't really things that he was trying to dredge up. And his sister, who is also in the film, Hannah, and her story is also absolutely incredible. She survived 2 concentration camps, Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. She had told her story to the Shoah Foundation when she was 90 years old. When I started filming her, she was 105. And she outlived Leo even. And but Leo had never, done this kind of testimony. And so he actually was a little bit reluctant, but because of the recording of the music, he started to become a little bit more open. And on top of that, I think that he instantly had an extremely good rapport with my father, Paul. And then, also then with myself and my mother, Brenda, as well. And so he became, a little more open to this. But in the beginning, it was just making a documentary about a recording of a CD.
Yeah.
And that's how it started, where we just went into some of these rehearsal sessions that they were having. And at first I thought, hey, if we just get the recording of the CD, that'll be a nice little documentary. And then I set up sort of an extensive interview with him, a nicely filmed interview. And I still didn't even know a ton of things yet, but by the time I finished that interview, more than ever, just started to realize how absolutely incredible this story is. As a documentarian, you just don't stumble into these kind of stories that often. Of this,
No, for sure.
Kind of quality.
And
So
I mean,
that's how it started.
I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, in watching it really felt like the music was informing the story and kind of vice versa. And it really felt, as you were putting this together, that you were never kind of losing focus on either. How important was it for you to sort of not have this maybe just turn into yet another Holocaust documentary, but really try to sort of walk that line between how important the piece of music was, not just for him, but with what he wanted to say and with his stories?
Certainly, as I said, it started music first, and he comes from a musical dynasty, and I come from a musical family as well. So that was always a key. And what made it even, even better and in a way easier was the fact that this Rhapsody that he wrote, which, as I said, sort of musically told his story, is broken into 3 sections. The first section covers the battle of when the Nazis came in and invaded Poland in September 1939. And the second, the middle part of the Rhapsody, represents his suffering of sort of the 5 years that he was in the ghetto and then finally in hiding. And then the very end of the Rhapsody is actually liberation. When they came in at the end, and he was liberated and freed. So just right away, there's already a structure to the music that instantly led us to a beautiful structure for the film as well. So his story and the music was always going hand in hand the whole time.
Can you talk a little bit about the animated sequences, just especially when he's sort of telling his story? And I mean, because it really felt to me like that kept me with him as a storyteller, as opposed to sort of witnessing a historical document.
Thanks. Well, sure, first I should just point out, because we haven't mentioned yet, one of the key things, and this leads to the animation, is that after Leo passed away, and we had actually recorded a full concert with him, triumphant Canadian premiere of his music. 6 months after he passed away, we actually found his secret wartime diaries that covered specifically, starting the day that he went into hiding, helped by a Polish Christian named Henry Wronski, and covered 18 months until literally the day of liberation is the final entry in his diary. And so this itself, and we can get more into this in a minute, but this itself changed the entire scope of the film, added another major development to it. And it took us 2 years to get these diaries translated, and we would get them sort of like, a few pages at a time. It was 180 pages. It took a long time to translate. And by Hanya Dorowicz, who did a terrific job. And as they were coming in, we already started to formulate during that time that in the film that we came up with the idea that we would tell the diary stories using animation, and as a way to set it apart, first of all, maybe from other documentaries as well. I mean, we didn't want to just make a typical Holocaust documentary. That's why it's a Holocaust documentary, but it has film. I mean, it has a music, and it has animation. And so we decided to animate all of the segments. How it started was I was already producing, directing, writing, and editing this film.
Yeah.
And I did a little bit of the camera work, but I'm also an artist as well. So I started going through the diaries and sort of finding the key moments, and then I started to storyboard them with the idea that we would find an animator. First person that we talked to was Chris. Trying to go blank for a second here.
No worries.
Yeah, Chris Landreth. Chris Landreth is one of the great animators, Canadian and otherwise. Chris has won an Academy Award for his work, for the great film that he did called Ryan, short film. Everybody should see it. It's terrific. And so he came on at the beginning as a consultant for just to be able to have somebody to talk with, and he gave some good advice. And then we spent a summer with some students at Seneca College with Chris, and we sort of brainstormed during that period to sort of come up with a look and feel. And then after that was over, although I ended up using a little bit of the work that we did, but the vast majority of the animation in the film I ended up doing by myself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was, which I hadn't done that myself, so I had to. Like I said, I had been a painter, not as my main profession. I'm a filmmaker by trade and a musician second. So I figured it out. I figured out how to do the animation. I did the artwork on Photoshop. It's a sort of a kind of a limited animation. And if I say so myself, it seems like it turned out.
I don't know. I think it turned out quite well. No, I agree with you.
People seem to really like it. And I think most importantly is that we really thought that the diaries themselves were so incredibly written, and that they played out at times like a thriller, like a film noir, like it had all of these different aspects to it. Of course, out of the 18 months of diary, probably the vast majority of time, like 99% of the time, he's in a room and he's not able to talk. He's not able to make a fire that people would see someone is there from the chimney. And so most of it is just sitting quietly, figuring out how to survive until the next day. But
For sure.
But there were moments, especially in the first 6 months, where he actually would sneak out of the house through a secret exit in the back. The front door was padlocked, so it seemed like nobody was there unless his helper would occasionally come by with food. But he would sneak out in the middle of the night. And sometimes he would go to visit his sister, Hannah, who at that time was one of 700 Jews that were still alive and were working sort of as slave labor in a factory. Originally, there was more than 10,000 Jews in a city of about 25,000 people. And then in one night of the liquidation in 1942, in October 1942, 10,000 of these Jews were sent to Auschwitz, where probably all of them died, and about 2,000 were murdered in one night. And Leo and his sister escaped this liquidation because Leo had caught word that this was coming and didn't want to take any chances. And so him and his brother-in-law dug a pit in a store underneath the stove or underneath a cabinet, out of the way. It was just like, in the Great Escape kind of thing, where he would just, dig out a handful of dirt and then walk outside and shake it out of the bottom of his pants, and little by little they dug a hole big enough to hide 4 people.
Wow.
And then when the liquidation came, they were prepared, and they hid in that pit for 3 days, eventually escaping out of the pit and then hiding in the cemetery that was filled with 2,000 dead bodies, some of whom were still not quite dead, and they pretended to be dead when the guards came by, because there was no other place to hide at that time. And so he was able to survive that. But then his sister Hannah, who was in the pit, did get caught and did get sent with about 700 Jews who managed to survive the liquidation as this kind of forced labor. And they were able to stay in this forced labor for probably more than a year, until all of them eventually, several months before the end of the war, were all sent to Auschwitz. And she was very fortunate, obviously, that she was able to survive Auschwitz. And while she was in Auschwitz, and her story is just as good as Leo's in many ways, while she was in Auschwitz, they were asking if they were transferring some people to Bergen-Belsen for another concentration camp, and she actually says that she volunteered because she figured there's nothing that could be worse than Auschwitz, and then she said Bergen-Belsen was worse. So,
It's it's amazing because And this is something I'm always really curious about. I mean, especially when you're telling a story like this that's taking place over years and has so many moving parts, and you're constantly doing research and then uncovering things, and things happen. How do you, as the filmmaker, as the storyteller, manage to keep structure, manage to keep things going? Because quite simply, like, if Leo had passed away before the concert, this would have been a different film.
Absolutely, and certainly if we did not find the diaries,
Exactly, yeah.
this would just be it would have been a film. I mean, it could have been a film of just the making of the CD would have been already a film. In fact, we did, then had we just had the concert, we were prepared that that was going to be the film, and it would have been if we didn't find the diaries. So that's the kind of magical and sometimes difficult part of being a documentarian. It happened on, I told you I had directed this other film called OCD, The War Inside. And, there was a similar thing with that where we, had filmed an initial bit, and then it took us a couple of years to raise the money and eventually to bring in the National Film Board onto the project. And during that time, one of the kids in our film that had OCD, he had visibly grown. So, you saw some time go by, and another person in our film, Trisha, who I just saw recently, when we started filming her OCD was not bothering her at that time. And by the time we finished shooting, it had gotten really bad. So, when you're doing a documentary, you have you think you have an idea of where it's going to go. And sometimes that happens, but sometimes things just come up that you never, ever expected. And the whole trick is, if you're doing your job right, is to find a way to go with it. But it wasn't easy. And like I said, it's one of the reasons why it took this many years, because we were already, probably almost a couple of years into it when we found the diaries. And then we had to wait a few years for them to be translated. And coming up with the structure was quite difficult. I've worked on several feature documentaries and hundreds of episodes of television, but this was probably the biggest challenge, because, as you were mentioning yourself, there's a music element, there's the diary element, there's the sister. There were so many moving parts that it really did take quite a long time to really figure out how to tell the story, jumping back and forth between World War II and the present. And what we tried to sort of do is the modern day story more or less unravels in real time, from the time we met Leo to the time we did the rehearsals to the concerts, and to eventually even taking his kids to Poland, to the town where he lived, and eventually was in hiding and escaped. And then the other part of the story was the World War II story, which also generally goes in a chronological order, more or less, from the time that he goes into hiding and into liberation. And then how to go back and forth between those two stories was a challenge that I'm hoping that we've successfully done.
Well, you know what? I think you did. You have, and then some. And thank you for going with it, because obviously this started from a piece of music, but you managed to uncover these amazing stories that you've gotten to share with the world now. And as people start to get to see this movie, and I think it's a beautiful thing. And just, congrats on the film. And thank you so much for the time today.
It was a pleasure.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.